Grover, Montana Territory, 1887. Jacob Reed had lived 11 years without expecting anyone to knock on his door for reasons that were not business. His wife Helen died during the winter of 1876. By the 5th year, Grover stopped suggesting women he might marry. By the 11th, even Jacob spoke of solitude as though it were part of the deed to his ranch. Then, Grace stepped off the stagecoach. She arrived in September with 2 trunks, a box of schoolbooks, and a coat too light for Montana. The driver set her luggage in the road and warned her that winter came early. Grace looked at the snow already visible on the distant peaks. "So I've been told." The driver laughed. "You don't sound worried. I left Billings to teach children. Weather seems simpler." Grace's arrival changed more than the schoolhouse. She organized a shelf of books in the mercantile so working families could borrow them. She persuaded ranchers to let older children attend lessons 3 days a week during harvest instead of leaving school entirely. She visited a miner's wife after childbirth and sat through the night when the woman developed a fever. People liked Grace. That made their interest in her private life feel, to them, almost like a right. The first rumor linked her to Thomas Bell, a widowed carpenter with 2 daughters. The second suggested the new doctor. When neither possibility developed, the town began watching Jacob. Grace saw the attention and refused to adjust her behavior. Jacob saw it and adjusted everything. At the school Christmas planning meeting, he stayed near the back wall. When Grace asked him to repair a loose window, he waited until she had left before doing it. The school had another problem that could not be repaired with a hammer. Enrollment had fallen below the number required for territorial funding. 3 families planned to keep their older children home for winter work. And the district superintendent warned Grace that Grover might lose its teacher by spring. Grace began evening lessons for ranch hands, widows, and anyone who needed arithmetic or reading. She charged nothing. The first night, only 2 boys arrived. The second week, Jacob entered carrying a broken harness buckle and sat in the back row. "I already know my letters," he said. "Then you can help Mr. Cole learn his." Jacob stayed. By late October, 12 adults attended. Jacob taught practical figures, feed ratios, fence lengths, interest on loans, while Grace handled reading and writing. Their partnership began in chalk dust and bad coffee, not romance. The evening program convinced 3 families to keep their older children enrolled through winter. With the school age enrollment restored, the superintendent agreed to keep the school open until summer. She found him there after dark. "You have become difficult to catch. I have work. You have always had work." Jacob drove another nail into the frame. Grace leaned against a desk. "Are you ashamed of being seen with me?" His hand stopped. "No, then why do you disappear whenever someone else enters the room?" He looked toward the window. "Because I know what they see." "What?" An old man mistaking kindness for something else. Grace's expression cooled. "You are not the only person in this arrangement capable of understanding her own feelings." Jacob returned to the window. "That is exactly what frightens me." She left without answering. Within a week, the entire town knew 3 things about Miss Grace Ellison. She was 29. She had broken an engagement. And she was not easily embarrassed by questions. Mrs. Tolliver asked at the mercantile why a woman would leave a respectable fiancé and move to Grover alone. Grace examined a sack of flour. Because respectable and right are not the same thing. The story traveled quickly. Jacob heard it while buying nails. He paid no attention. Or told himself he did not. Their first real conversation away from the evening lessons happened because of a broken schoolhouse stove. The old iron stove began smoking during lessons. Grace opened windows, moved the children outside, and sent one boy to find help. The boy found Jacob. Jacob repaired most things in Grover because he disliked watching people repair them badly. He arrived with tools, entered the schoolhouse without greeting, and spent 40 minutes clearing the pipe and resetting the damper. Grace watched from the doorway. When he finished, she handed him coffee. "I didn't ask for payment," he said. "It is coffee. I can see that." "Then we are making progress." Jacob looked at her. She smiled. Not flirtatiously, not cautiously. Simply as if speaking to him required no special preparation. He drank the coffee. The following Saturday, Grace rode to Jacob's ranch with a stack of school papers tied in cloth. "I need help." He looked past her toward the road. With what? My older students are learning measurements. I want them to understand acreage, fencing, and feed calculations. You came 6 miles for arithmetic? I came 6 miles because everyone in town says you know more about running land than anyone else. Jacob glanced at her saddle. You ride alone? Yes, you shouldn't. Then teach me a faster route. He almost smiled. Instead, he invited her inside. That was the first Saturday. The second, she brought 3 students. The third, she came alone to return a ledger he had loaned her. The fourth, snow began before she was ready to leave. Jacob stood on the porch watching the sky. You'll stay until morning. Grace tightened her scarf. I can make town. No. She raised an eyebrow. Jacob added, the North Road drifts first. That sounded less like advice than an order. It was both. She stayed. They ate stew at the kitchen table. Afterward, Grace noticed the second bedroom had not been used in years. She noticed the dustless blue cup on the shelf. She noticed the framed photograph near the lamp, Jacob beside a fair-haired woman with a calm face and one hand resting on his arm. Helen? Grace asked. Jacob's shoulders stiffened. Yes, she was beautiful. He waited for the usual discomfort, the apology, the quick change of subject. Grace studied the photograph. She looks kind. She was. What did she laugh at? Jacob looked at her. No one had asked that in 11 years. He sat slowly. Bad music, he said. Especially mine. Grace smiled. You played? Fiddle. Do you still? No. Why? He looked toward the photograph. I stopped. Grace did not ask him to begin again. Instead, she asked him to help prepare the school's winter recital. Jacob refused twice. On the third attempt, Grace placed his fiddle on the table and said, the children sing as though volume can replace pitch. We require help. He attended the first rehearsal and stood near the door. Peter Tolliver missed every entrance. 2 sisters argued over one songbook. A boy named Amos refused to sing because his father called music foolish. Jacob played the melody once. The room quieted. By the 4th rehearsal, he was correcting rhythm with the patience he never showed adults. Grace watched him kneel beside Amos and adjust the boy's grip on the bow. You are good with them, she said afterward. They listen better than cattle. Most people do. Jacob almost smiled. The recital drew every family in Grover, including people who had questioned Grace's methods. Jacob played from the corner, half hidden behind a pine garland. When the children finished, the applause startled him more than it did them. That was the first thing he trusted about her. If you were Grace, would you keep showing up for a man who seemed determined to stay alone? Tell me in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to Dusty Mercy. The visits continued. The weekly rides created a map of small changes. Grace brought curtains for the kitchen because Jacob's old ones had faded almost white. He protested until she pointed out that one had a hole large enough for a bird to enter. Jacob built a bookshelf for the school. He claimed the lumber was scrap. Grace knew walnut when she saw it. She taught him to read poetry without treating every line like a legal notice. He taught her to harness a team in winter gloves. One evening, she found his fiddle in a trunk. You said you stopped. I did. That is not the same as being unable. He took the instrument from her. The wood was dry but intact. Grace sat beside the stove. I am not asking for a concert. I have not played in 11 years. Then no one can accuse you of over-practicing. Jacob looked at her. She waited. He drew the bow once. The note came thin and rough. He almost put the fiddle away. Grace said, again. The second note held. By the end of the evening, Jacob had played half of an old waltz. Grace did not applaud. She understood that would have made it a performance. She only said, Helen had good reason to laugh. Jacob smiled. For the first time, Grace could imagine the man Helen had known before grief settled over him. Grace brought practical reasons. A broken desk. A question about winter travel. A student whose family needed firewood. A request to borrow a horse for a lesson. Eventually, she stopped inventing them. She would arrive near dusk, remove her gloves, and say, I had a difficult day. Jacob would put coffee on. Sometimes they spoke until midnight. Grace told him about Billings in pieces. She first told Jacob that Charles had selected their house. Weeks later, she admitted he had also selected the furniture, the church, and the month of the wedding. Only in late October did she tell the full truth. 3 nights before the ceremony, Charles explained that married women did not need independent bank accounts. Grace asked whether she could continue teaching. He answered that she would be too busy raising his children, not their children. Grace looked around the parlor he had chosen. At curtains she had not selected and wedding gifts addressed to Mrs. Charles Avery, and understood that she was disappearing before the marriage had begun. She left before dawn. Her father did not speak to her for 6 months. Her mother wrote secretly. "I came to Grover because no one here knew the version of me everyone in Billings had already decided was selfish," Grace said. Jacob sat across from her. "What did you want?" Charles never asked. "I am asking." Grace looked into her cup. "I wanted to be chosen without being arranged." Jacob nodded. "Leaving took courage. I was terrified. Those are not opposites." For the first time, Grace believed he understood why she had run. By November, people had noticed her rides to the ranch. Grover divided quickly. Some were amused. Some were concerned. A few were cruel. Mrs. Tolliver said Grace was wasting the best years of her life on a man nearly 30 years older. One of the ranch wives said Jacob should know better. Grace heard all of it. Jacob heard more. He began pulling away. One Saturday, she arrived to find the barn closed and the house dark. Jacob was inside. He sat at the table while she knocked. He did not answer. After 5 minutes, Grace left a loaf of bread on the porch and rode back through light snow. The following week, he opened the door but did not invite her in. "You should stop coming." Grace searched his face. "Why?" "People are talking. People talk when the wind changes. This is different. Only if we let it be." Jacob looked toward her horse. "You are 29. I am aware. I am 58. I know that too. You could have children. So could many women. You could have a life that does not begin by caring for an old man." Grace's face hardened. "Is that how you see yourself?" "It is what I am." "No. It is what fear has taught you to say." Jacob stepped onto the porch. The air was cold enough to turn every breath white. "You deserve more than I can give. That is not your decision. I have buried a wife, and I left a man I did not love. That is not the same." "No," Grace said, "it is not. But both of us built lives around what we were afraid would happen next." Jacob shook his head. "You don't understand." "Then explain it." He looked past her toward the fields. "When Helen died, there was nothing I could do. Nothing. One day she was speaking. The next she could barely breathe. 3 days later, I was standing in frozen ground while men lowered her out of my life." Grace's anger softened. Jacob continued. "I learned something that winter. Anything you love becomes a way for the world to break you." Grace stood very still. "Then the world already broke you," she said. He looked at her. "Because you have spent 11 years living as if the worst thing that happened to you must be the last important thing." The words struck hard. Jacob's voice dropped. "I am too old for you." Grace stepped closer. "For me, you are perfect." Silence settled between them. Grace had offered exactly what he wanted, and accepting it terrified him. Jacob's eyes lowered. Grace waited. He wanted to reach for her. Instead, he said, "You should go." The pain in her face appeared and disappeared almost at once. "Then say the truth." "I did." "No. Say you do not love me." Jacob could not. Grace nodded. "That is what I thought." She mounted her horse and left. A month before Grace received the Helena offer, a child disappeared in a snowstorm. 9-year-old Peter Tolliver had stayed late at the schoolhouse copying lessons. He left just as the weather turned and never reached home. By dusk, Grover had formed search parties. Grace blamed herself. "I should have sent him earlier." Jacob tightened the saddle on his horse. "You did not make the storm. I let him leave alone. Then help us find him." That was how Jacob handled panic. He gave it work. They searched the creek road first. Snow covered tracks within minutes. Lanterns moved through the dark like small, uncertain stars. Near midnight, Grace's horse stumbled. Jacob caught the bridle. "You need to go back." "No. You can barely feel your hands. Neither can Peter." Jacob looked at her and understood argument would waste time. They continued. At 2 in the morning, Jacob noticed a break in the snow beneath a stand of pine. A child-sized footprint remained where the wind had not reached. They followed it uphill. Peter had crawled into an abandoned trapping shed. He was alive, frightened, and beginning to lose feeling in his feet. Grace wrapped him in her coat. Jacob carried him down the mountain. For 3 hours they took turns speaking to the boy to keep him awake. At one point, Peter whispered, "Are you married?" Grace looked at Jacob. "No," she said. "You sound married." Even Jacob laughed. Peter recovered. The town praised Jacob and Grace for finding him. But what remained with Jacob was not the praise. It was the sight of Grace taking off her own coat in killing cold without hesitation. What remained with Grace was Jacob carrying a child for miles after his legs had begun shaking. They had both spent years judging themselves by what they had fled. That night revealed who they became when someone needed them. The superintendent from Helena arrived 2 weeks later to review the school. He saw the evening class ledgers, Peter's arithmetic work, and the winter recital program pinned to the wall. He offered Grace a position at a larger school before leaving town. The offer was not an escape invented after Jacob rejected her. It was the professional opportunity she had worked toward for years: better pay, older students, and access to a real library. Grace told Jacob about it during their next ride. "You should consider it," he said. She waited for him to add something. He discussed the salary, the distance, and the quality of the school. He never said he wanted her to stay. Grace understood that Jacob believed this was generosity. To her, it felt like another man deciding which future was best without risking his own heart. That was the beginning of the distance between them, long before the trunks appeared. Grace did not accept immediately. She asked the superintendent for 10 days and spent them comparing 2 futures without reducing either one to a man. Helena offered a library, older students, and wages large enough to send money to her widowed aunt. Grover offered a school she had nearly rebuilt from nothing, children whose handwriting she recognized from across the room, and evening students who had stopped hiding their inability to read. She wrote 2 lists on the blackboard after everyone left. Peter found them the next morning. "Which side is winning?" he asked. "Life is not arithmetic. You say everything is arithmetic when you want us to show our work." Grace erased the board before the other children arrived. She eventually accepted Helena because it was good work, not because Grover had failed her. Jacob's silence made leaving easier, but she refused to make him the sole author of her choice. When the trunks appeared, they held ambition as well as heartbreak. December came. The cold sharpened. Grace stopped visiting. Jacob found reasons to ride past the schoolhouse. He never entered. At church, they sat on opposite sides. The town believed the matter finished. Grace began packing after she sent her acceptance to Helena. The new position was real and worthy of her. So was the pain of leaving Grover without ever hearing Jacob ask her to stay. On the Friday before Jacob came, Mrs. Tolliver visited the schoolhouse. "I suppose you think we drove you away," the older woman said. Grace folded a dress into a trunk. "No." Mrs. Tolliver looked disappointed by the answer. "Jacob Reed is a good man. I know. He is also old enough to be your father. My father is alive. I have no confusion between them." Mrs. Tolliver flushed. "I only mean that people worry. People disguise curiosity as worry because it sounds kinder." The woman stood in silence. Then she looked at the crates. "Will you be happier in Helena?" Grace stopped packing. "I don't know." Mrs. Tolliver nodded slowly. "For what it is worth, Jacob has looked less dead since you came." Mrs. Tolliver would never call it an apology, but Grace heard one. The Helena school was larger, and the work would let Grace teach older students. She planned to leave after Christmas. Her students discovered the crates before she announced the decision. Peter Tolliver stood beside the packed arithmetic books and asked whether Helena's children needed her more. "No," Grace said. "They need a teacher. Grover will have one too. Will you like them better?" The question hurt because children made leaving sound personal even when adults dressed it as opportunity. Grace gave each student a final writing assignment. Describe the place where you intend to build a life. That evening, she read papers about ranches, shops, distant cities, and one improbable ship at sea. Her own page remained blank. Jacob heard it from the blacksmith. Jacob returned home, opened the drawer that held Helen's wedding ring, and closed it again. He rode to her grave before sunrise. "I thought loving anyone else would make what we had smaller," he said. "All I managed was to make my life smaller." The town jeweler opened early for him and sold him a plain gold band. Jacob chose it because Grace deserved a promise made for her, not an heirloom she had never been asked whether she wanted. The next Saturday, snow began before dawn. Grace was at the schoolhouse packing books into crates. She heard the door open. Jacob stood there covered in snow. His coat was unbuttoned. His hat sat crooked. He looked like a man who had crossed 6 miles without noticing weather. "You should not be here," she said. "I know." She turned back to the books. "I leave Tuesday." "I know." "For Helena." "I know." Grace closed a crate. "Then why are you here?" Jacob removed his gloves. "Because I have been a coward." She looked at him. "I told myself I was protecting you. I was protecting myself. I told myself age made this impossible because that sounded more honorable than admitting I was afraid to love someone I might lose." Grace said nothing. He stepped closer. "I cannot offer you the years a younger man could. I never asked for them. I cannot promise you children. I know. I cannot promise I will never wake from dreams of Helen and feel lost for a while." Grace's eyes filled. "I would never ask you to forget her." Jacob reached into his coat and opened his hand. A new gold ring rested there. "I kept Helen's ring because it belongs to the life we had," he said. "This one is for the life I am asking you to choose." He lowered himself between 2 rows of school desks. "Grace Ellison, I cannot offer the number of years a younger man could. I can offer the truth from now on. Will you marry me?" Grace knelt in front of him. "Yes." Jacob closed his eyes. For one moment, he looked almost young. Their only serious argument before the wedding concerned children. Jacob feared leaving Grace with a young family. Grace refused to pretend the risk belonged only to an older husband. "I am choosing the years we have," she said. "Neither of us knows their number." He did not ask her to defend the choice again. Jacob promised to improve with her rather than use fear as a reason to decide for her. They left the conversation still afraid, but no longer carrying the fear separately. The engagement did not immediately quiet Grover. Some people treated Grace as though she had made an impulsive mistake. Others treated Jacob as though he had stolen something meant for a younger man. The most direct confrontation came at the mercantile. A rancher named Edwin Cole said, within Grace's hearing, "A man ought to know when to leave youth to the young." Jacob stood beside a barrel of flour. For 11 years, he had avoided scenes. That day, he turned. Grace is not a parcel of land for younger men to divide among themselves. The store became silent. Edwin lifted both hands. "I meant no insult. You meant exactly what you said." Grace watched Jacob cross the room. He did not threaten. He did not raise his voice. "She chose me," he said. "You may think poorly of her choice. You will still speak of it with respect." Edwin apologized. Outside, Grace caught Jacob's hand. "You did not need to defend me." "I know." "Then why did you?" He looked at her. "Because silence served me badly for 11 years. Grace smiled. "Good answer." That evening, Jacob played the fiddle at the schoolhouse winter gathering. His hands shook through the first tune. Grace stood beside the children and listened. By the third song, couples were dancing. No one in Grover ever again described Jacob Reed as a man who had stopped living. They married in February. Snow stood high against the church steps. Half the town disapproved of the age difference until the ceremony began. By the time Jacob placed the new gold ring on Grace's finger, even Mrs. Tolliver was crying. The following January, a fever moved through Grover. Grace cared for sick children at the schoolhouse while Jacob carried food and firewood to isolated families. Then, Jacob became ill. For 2 nights, Grace sat beside him and listened to his breathing change. "I knew this would happen," he whispered. "What?" "You would spend your life waiting for me to die." Grace pressed a cool cloth to his forehead. "I am spending tonight helping you live." The fever broke on the third morning. That spring, Jacob planted 2 cottonwoods beside the house. Grace continued teaching. Jacob repaired the schoolhouse roof each spring whether it needed it or not. They had 2 children. Henry was born the following winter, and May came 3 years later. Jacob lived until 74. Grace buried him beneath the cottonwoods beside Helen's older grave. His stone read, "Jacob Reed, beloved husband and father." Helen's blue cup remained on the second shelf. Grace never moved it. Her own red cup stood beside it, used every morning. Do you think Jacob would have spoken before Grace packed her trunks? Tell me below. Subscribe to Dusty Mercy for a new Western story every week.